No, I think their kitchen's gonna need the 15 amp. Pass me that one. No, not the switch one. Yeah, well, I kind of stink at electrician stuff anyway. Let's talk handheld systems. Handheld devices are certainly nothing new. In fact, a handheld console is currently winning the console war against the far superior hardware of the PS5 and the current Xbox. But over the years, there have been some downright stupid handheld ideas. Some might have been abysmal yet successful, such as the Tiger Electronics. I wish the Tiger had failed, but it was tragically successful. While other choices weren't necessarily bad, but flopped anyway. Some with far superior hardware, years ahead of their time. So let's check out the stupidest and failed handheld game systems. And as always, it's just my silly personal opinion. You're not hurting anyone if you like these systems, so more power to you. And I'd love to hear what you like about them in the comments. With that said, let's begin. For our first stupid choice, we have the Gamecom. The Gamecom was made by Tiger Electronics. Ah, well there's your problem right there.
Gamecom Active.
If Tiger Electronics took the time to stop momentarily disappointing unknowing children, and they made a console, how abysmal could they possibly make it? I mean, it's not like the other Tiger junk, it's a full-blown dedicated handheld gaming system. Meant to kinda sorta match, I don't know, the Nintendo? And it had innovative features such as a touchscreen and dial-up internet connectivity. And let me tell you, for 1997, those were damn well impressive and ahead of their time. But this was the 90s gift that just kept on taking. Your childhood soul. To put it politely, the game stunk. While some critics praised the idea of a touchscreen, other critics were less forgiving of literally everything else about the console. And like, they were competing against the Nintendo Game Boy and the Sega Game Gear. What were they expecting? And even if the Gamecom wasn't competing, this thing made those Wish.com block games look like the peak of perfection by comparison. You see, Tiger gave us a boring black and white screen with limited games, an inaccurate touchscreen capability, and a very poor battery life. And look at my friend Nick trying to play what is likely the worst Sonic game ever conceived to this day, Sonic Jam on the Gamecom.
Oh, it is the worst. There is no Sonic game that compares. Not Rise of Lyric, not Sonic 06. Those are masterpieces compared to the Gamecom version of Sonic Jam. The screenshots on the box show me the Genesis sprite, so I was hoping for something at least along those lines. What I instead got was a broken, ever-lingering experience of misery. It's a miracle I'm still a Sonic fan after playing that game, and I can't even imagine what it was like for a child who had this as their first ever Sonic experience. Heck, their first ever game experience. The Game Boy was ancient by the time this came out, and this ran way worse than Nintendo's little machine. I will admit, as a kid, I was fortunate enough to be a little more glued in, so I knew that since this was Tiger Electronics, that this machine would be trash. So thankfully, I didn't make it a priority for my particular Christmas list. In fact, I only ever played this thing as an adult.
But why on earth would you buy a Gamecom willingly as an adult?
Because I found a green one, and I like green things. Also, it's got Sonic Jam on it. I love Sonic Jam.
Huh, well, fair enough. Let's see what others thought of the Gamecom. Charles reviewed it, and he said,
I still have this, and it's been collecting dust since I bought it in the 90s. Cheap games, cheap graphics, and no colour. Don't waste your money on this piece of garbage.
Oh, hi, Nin.
Hi, Nick. I got you a green flower.
Oh, you got me a clover?
No, it's a green flower.
well, it's a thought that counts. What did Classic Game Room say?
It's a wounded house cat of a system, but not without merit. It would be easy to drag this through the mud, but it actually tried to do a fair bit. Problem was, everything failed because of one fatal flaw. The crappiest screen ever.
And I mean, I get it. Just look at the Gamecom's graphics here.
But the graphics are the best part. It lets me play my favorite Sonic Special stage on the go, Black Spheres. And look at that frame rate. Listen to that music. Who needs ears?
Yeah, it's bad. Overall, the Gamecom had some good ideas.
What ideas? You mean the touchscreen? Internet connection? The built-in killer app for every machine? Solitaire? Does any of that make up for this game?
Well, no, I guess it doesn't. Okay, Gamecom was a dumb idea of a system with lazy, cheap graphics and abysmal gameplay, and some add-on peripherals that weren't gonna make up for all that. But it did serve a good purpose.
Punishing bad kids?
Well, maybe Nintendo years later took notice of the stylus and the touchscreen and used them properly years later in the Nintendo DS.
I don't know if the DS took it from there or from Blackberries, but if the Tiger Gamecom crawled at 3 frames per second so the DS could walk, I guess that is something. It is, if nothing else, a fascinating piece of gaming history.
And for our next stupid choice, we have the Tiger Electronic games. When the 90s arrived, gaming at home was no longer a distant dream, and this new handheld gaming we had was revolutionary. Handhelds like the Game Boy were a must-have in every kid's pocket, but unfortunately, the price tag on them was steep. It was too steep for some families, particularly those with more than one kid. For many years, mine was included in that. I couldn't afford a Game Boy. Enter Tiger Electronics.
Tiger puts arcade action in the palm of your hand.
What's so special about Tiger Electronics? It's the only time in handheld gaming where nothing was the superior option. You'll have more fun just twiddling your thumbs and playing one of these things. It's a real insult to say these rivaled the Game Boy though. I know, because for many years when my family couldn't afford a Game Boy, these were my only option. Instead of a Game Boy, I had the Flintstones movie Tiger Electronics game. It was so bad. But later, we got real fancy and got a Sonic Tiger Electronics game.
It's Sonic 3, the handheld game.
I thought this thing was so cool with its like 1 frame of animation and the black and white screen I could barely make out the figures on. Even as a kid, I knew this thing stunk. At first glance, before you turn them on, these things look really cool. Look at that outside art. The resounding theme of these things was the cover art was far more interesting than the game itself. I guess in theory, the Tiger Electronics is a nice idea. For families on a budget, it meant all the kids could have a handheld game in their back pocket at a mere fraction of the price of the Game Boy. But then the kids actually turn on the games, and there's never been such a shared simultaneous disappointment in kids around the world, and resentment at other kids who had a real Game Boy. No, I'm not projecting. I mean, just look at these things. These games were simple, crudely designed and made stick figures look detailed. Flintstones and later Sonic 3 was my suffering, and not only was the processing speed abysmal, but I could barely make out the tiny glary figures on the tiny crappy screen. But despite my feelings on them, these garbage games were so popular. You see, Tiger bought licenses for all sorts of pop culture icons. No matter what movie, comic, cartoon, or video game you liked, chances are there was a cheap, basic Tiger handheld game you could get in its honor.
Now the Little Mermaid and all her friends come to you in a fun-filled handheld game.
It didn't matter that these things were like the most boring thing ever. They were cheap and readily available. But I carried this garbage in my book bag once and never again, because I was embarrassed to be seen with these things. And some people even started collections of these stupid Tiger systems, hopefully just to look at and not to turn on. It's not like you could just change games on these things, so we had to fill up landfills with this plastic garbage. For all the challenges and horrifying experiences I've had in the last 35 years, the constant redeeming contentment I have is how advanced and cheap modern technology has become. Because for even the poorest Gen Alpha kid buying the cheapest, crappiest handheld games at Kmart, they never will have to put up with handheld games as unabashedly horrible as Tiger Electronic games. A handheld game will never be this bad again. And that is my weird piece amidst the chaos. My rantings aside, I think Ben brings up a good point on the positives of these games existing at the time. Because I have to find some meaning for 90s children suffering through these. Despite being cheap garbage, they did serve as an important stepping stone for families with a tight budget.
I can appreciate parents who wanted to get their kids something, but couldn't afford a Game Boy. Did they bring joy to kids who didn't have much? Absolutely.
Well, not me. Hate them or tolerate them, I guess. They served a purpose, at least until the kids got their Game Boys, which I really hope they did. Then at least they would never get turned on again and become a pretty paperweight. Or better yet, they were smashed to tiny pieces with a hammer. I'd be happier with that. Our next stupid choice is the handheld brick games. Yeah, as an adult I can see these brick games were garbage, but as a child, these games were my savior from Tiger Electronics games. They were so much better. It was later in the 90s and the Game Boy and Game Gear were still revolutionizing handheld gaming, but my family still couldn't afford me a Game Boy and certainly not a Game Gear. So one day at the markets, my dad got me one of these cheap Chinese handheld brick games, and I loved it. Game Boy owed a lot of its success to games like Tetris, so I guess there was really no surprise when a cheap Tetris-like knockoff system landed in the market. It was another cost-effective alternative to the Game Boy. But compared to Tiger games,
they had colorful artwork that looked way better than the that came on inside the screen.
It was incredible. They often had tens to hundreds of pre-installed games listed by letters of the alphabet. These games were intended as clone games of their popular counterparts like Tetris, Tanks, Breakout, and racing games. But unlike Tiger games, the bricks on my screen actually moved. I had a real frame rate and real gameplay. The animation was smooth, and with hundreds of cheap knockoff games, what variety I got! It didn't matter that everything on my screen was a brick, there was actual gameplay. I can say now that these things stink, but when I was 8, I owed many hours of entertainment to these games. Many long car trips were much more interesting with my trusty handheld brick game by my side. They still had an LCD screen with no backlighting, so I couldn't play in the dark. But things moved, so I was happy. The buttons on these things were often very cheap, they sticked a lot and were very flimsy. But hey, it was fun and it still only cost $20, so it didn't matter. By the time my first one broke, my dad went to the market and got me an upgraded version with 200 games on it.
There are more than 2,000 ways to play.
But from a modern perspective, the rat guy on YouTube really sums up well how these feel.
To control games, you use the plastic buttons on the front, and boy, do they feel cheap. They wobble and rattle if you even lightly shake the thing.
Nowadays, the sound on them is also pretty irritating. The monophonic speakers often play annoying music throughout the gameplay, plus the monophonic boot up and sound effects. But at the time, it was music to my ears. These sounded way better than Tiger Electronic games. Yes, they set the bar really, really low, but looking back on it now, the sound just reminds me of those polyphonic ringtones, which I really don't think many people miss nowadays. But let's see if there are some reviews from a less biased perspective than mine. Plus on Amazon said,
Stupid piece of non-working metal thing. It's so cheaply made, it's not even worth a 1 star.
Well, that's a good start. Maybe Ren had a better experience.
Screen doesn't work. You can't see anything. Absolute waste of money.
Ah, that'll be the backlights, or lack thereof. I'm curious though of what modern Gen Alpha kids thought of the games. Sandy's kids played it.
My kids can't understand the game, and neither do I.
Yeah, these brick games have aged like cottage cheese in the warm sun. But for a Game Boy starved kid in the 90s, they were my savior from Tiger Electronics. Because not even a 7-year-old could enjoy Tiger Electronics.
But that didn't stop these games from flooding the market.
Because jeepers, I hated Tiger Electronics. On to the next one. And for a failed choice, we have the N-Gage. Ah, thank Jeeves, a handheld from 2004. The march of time may be ruthless, but at least it saved us from tigers and bricks. This, my friend, is a gaming console and a smartphone. Now, even if that sounds like a great idea, these gaming console smartphones sold notoriously badly, no matter how revolutionary the technology, and you'll probably see a pattern of that in future failed choices. The Nokia N-Gage was more commonly known as the taco phone because of its shape, and the awkward way you had to speak into it during a phone call. But just look at these gaming specs. 11 megabytes of storage space, 0.1 gigahertz single core processor. Holy cow! This thing was abysmal. But credit where credit's due, it could play Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and Sonic N, aka Sonic Advance for the N-Gage. And again, this screen is 1,000 times better than Tiger Electronics. They really set the bar low. And I do like the idea of a smartphone/gaming console hybrid. It eliminated the need for carrying two devices in your pockets and pack. And when I finally got one, I was most certainly one of those kids who proudly carried his bulky Game Boy with him, as if I was leaving my Pokemon Red version at home. Anyway, Nokia truly believed the N-Gage was set to be a big hit. So what went wrong? Well, firstly, the design of it was seen as quite confusing. In order to combine the two devices, there was a mess of mushy buttons on either side of the screen. The screen itself was in portrait mode, making gameplay cumbersome and difficult. And possibly worst of all, in order to simply change games, you had to dismantle the back cover and the battery pack. To top it off, the price tag on this was set at $299. And in 2004, that was a fair chunk more money than it is now. To put it in perspective, it was priced $100 higher than the Game Boy Advance. Not to mention the games themselves went at $30 a piece. But I'm curious what others thought, and people did have a lot to say about the N-Gage. What did San Fran think?
Oh brother, after eagerly awaiting this, it's a tremendous disappointment. It does several things, but not very well. And the cartridge position is ridiculous. It's like performing surgery just to change a game. 1 star.
What did Michael say?
More like disengage. It's like a broken Swiss Army knife. Hundreds of different tools that randomly burst open at the worst times.
But this poor reputation did not deter Nokia. Credit to them, they were determined to prove this was a great idea. Even when initial sales were poor, they launched a redesign. The game slot was at the bottom instead of behind the battery pack. Good. The earpiece was on the front instead of the side, and it was physically smaller and rounder. They even lowered the price and made it available at prepaid retailers. I respect how much they listened to feedback and did their best with it. But unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. The Game Boy Advance just completely overshadowed the N-Gage, and it seems like that previous model had soured Nokia's gaming reputation. But personally, I still think the N-Gage was a great idea. And for our next rather stupid choice, the original Tamagotchi. Yeah, this certainly can't be called fail, because in the 90s, the Tamagotchi was everywhere.
It's not the kind of thing you'd expect kids to scramble for. Cyber pets, or as they're known in Japanese, Tamagotchi.
When I was a young 90s kid, so many other kids I knew had one. They carried them all over school, and they pulled them out in the lunch breaks. But like the original Furby, the original Tamagotchi was so stupidly designed. I guess some would call it quote-unquote revolutionary, but it was mostly just an annoying beeping tragedy waiting to happen. Now obviously, the idea of a pet dying is a deeply sad thing. But imagine if that pet died over and over and over again every time you dropped your Tamagotchi.
So somebody has to look after it. It's like a pet. If you can't look after it, don't get it.
This was one of the many nuisances and frustrations of the original Tamagotchi. But no child has accidentally ever dropped something, so I guess we're perfectly fine.
Well, that's just silly. My niece and nephew drop stuff all the time.
Exactly. Do you remember in some schools there was sometimes a project where kids would care for an egg? The kids would have to take it everywhere and care for it for a week. If the egg cracked or broke, the kids failed the project. Well, Tamagotchis were the equivalent of that in electronic form. It was a pet you took care of, played with, fed. In the original version, you even cleaned up its droppings. As you might have guessed, in newer versions nowadays, you don't have to clean its droppings.
But teaching kids responsibility is a good thing.
In theory, yes, that's a great thing to do. But it comes at a price. You see, like a live pet or a baby human particularly, the Tamagotchi was incessantly needy. Whenever it was hungry, needed attention, it was sick, or even when it went to the bathroom, the Tamagotchi beeped at you. And it did so at the most annoying times.
All night and day, the little cyber pet beeps, demanding food, entertainment, even needles when sick.
During dinner, during school classes, when you were sleeping, or other times when you were preoccupied as an adult, That's right, when you were at office meetings. Like a child or live pet, the Tamagotchi didn't care what you were doing. It needed your attention now. You could mute the little blighter's beeping, but the problem was it still needed you. And if it doesn't get what it needs, your incessantly annoying beeping little buddy would die. So not only was it upsetting for the child, but it was upsetting for the parents too. I mean, have you ever had to console a child when their pet dies? Well, try doing it over and over and over, because let me assure you, these things are prone to death. Don't feed it, boom, dead. You drop it, boom, dead. It gets sick and you don't cure it quick enough, boom, dead. Dead. It died a lot. Anyway, for whatever reason, us 90s kids love these things. I wanted one for some reason. When the Tamagotchi got a revival around 2016, the response was fascinating because many kids of today disliked these responsibility-driven toys. They certainly weren't the big hit they were in the 90s. Let's see what some modern kids had to say. Chriselle, age 11, said,
"Doesn't this thing get tiring after a while?"
Kelly's 9 and she said,
"I want to live my life, not take care of this thing."
And age 10 Casey was quite profound in her statement.
"If you don't play it often enough, it could die, and that's a game for kids."
I mean, I get their frustrations, and especially in a time where we want less screen time, maybe bringing back an incessantly needy electronic screen pet wasn't the best idea. The modern Tamagotchis are a bit more refined with features like minigames and wireless connectivity, though users can no longer discipline or toilet train their Tamagotchi. They mostly just feed it, play with it, and cure it of the occasional sickness. And one more review from a customer at Walmart.
The screen was way too dark and my Tamagotchi kept dying. I think I got a dud.
No, my friend, you didn't get a dud. You got a Tamagotchi.
A thing that makes noises when it needs something from you. I guess that's also what kids are.
Father.
It's true.
Our next failed choice is the Gizmondo. Released in 2005, the Gizmondo has some major stories behind it, and they all led to one big failure, because this, my friend, is the worst-selling handheld console ever, selling less than 25,000 units globally. If you own a Gizmondo, congratulations! You are one of 0.0000003% of people who own one. But what exactly is the Gizmondo? Well, primarily it was meant to be a gaming console. But the catch? This was all a ruse so parents could track their kids with a GPS tracking system. Its original intent was being a child tracking device for parents. Originally, in fact, they were pretty obvious about it. It was called the Game Track. Yeah, I know, weird. The creators thought that if it was a gaming device, the kids would be more likely to take the device with them. Thus, it would be easier for the parents to track their children. But due to copyrights on the term Game Track, they had to rename it to Gizmondo. Oh no. Originally, it was promised to have metal casing, but it interfered with the GPS, so they had to change the final design. Anyway, despite the questionable child tracking, the Gizmondo did have some interesting features, like 3D graphics, Bluetooth, and the ability to send texts and email. Plus a 1.3 megapixel camera, which was pretty good back at the time. The device was surprisingly ahead of its time, but at the end of the day, it failed abysmally. There was a multitude of different reasons for this, such as these.
1. It was only available to buy online, or from the Gizmondo shop in London, and some small mall kiosks later. 2. It was expensive. At $400 each, it was far higher priced than its competitors like the Nintendo DS. 3. Its screen was ridiculously small. 4. Third-party game support was basically non-existent. 5. The GPS software was unavailable in the USA. 6. Only 8 of its 14 games were available in the USA.
Oof. Alienating your US audience? What were they thinking? It was a small, expensive, boring system with a GPS feature that doesn't even work overseas. The writing was on the wall, and the Gizmondo was discontinued 11 months after it was released. But you know, the people behind the Gizmondo were even weirder than the device itself. Apparently, Tiger Telematics,
not to be confused with Tiger Electronics,
the two owners had an extensive background in organized crime, fraud, and the Swedish mafia. Sweden has a mafia? When this criminal history came out in the press, the owners and many others resigned from Tiger Telematics. Around the time Gizmondo was canned, Tiger Telematics filed for bankruptcy. Following the flop of Gizmondo, they were hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars.
Hang on, what about the games?
Well, the thing is, it only had like 14 games. LGR checked out some of the games and commented that the D-pad was clunky, the controls were too small for adult hands, and the system really needed an analog stick for games of 2005. There was toy golf, like mini golf, but for some reason even more tiny, because I guess mini golf just wasn't small enough. Probably the most popular game on the system was Sticky Balls. It's like pool, but you have to match colored balls together. Fascinating stuff, I know.
Wait, that was the most popular game on the system?
Well, there was only 12 of the games, so I guess the 25,000 owners weren't exactly overblown with choice. Now for an extra stupid choice, the Gamer v My Arcade. Over the years, there have been some amazing retro handheld gaming systems, keeping those classic old games fresh and polished and easy to play for every generation. But then you get the trash, enter the Gamer v My Arcade. I mean, the first thing you might notice is this handheld looks really cheap and plasticky, and the screen is so small you'll likely be squinting your eyes. Plus, the buttons are janky and badly positioned. It's like no comfort was considered in the design of this handheld, they just kind of floundered around and threw the buttons anywhere. One Amazon reviewer said you may need hand surgery in order to play it.
This is the worst D-pad I have ever used in my life. I don't think anyone with human-shaped hands can think this D-pad is good.
I mean, he's right. Why is the start button so high up the top? And why are the action buttons on top of each other? How is this at all intuitive? Putting these gripes aside, let's look at the games. How did it actually play? Well, we open with the 220 games menu screen. Well, at least that's some variety. And it's presented by this monkey fella, and monkeys are awesome, so I like that. And I suppose the menu system's easy enough to navigate, and the preview on the left is helpful when you're scrolling through 220 games. And most of the games themselves are nicely animated. I like the sharp, bright colors, and it's a million times nicer looking than the brick handheld games I grew up with. I probably would have been astounded if I had this in the 90s. But, well, standards have increased in the last 20-30 years. Toy Collector here was playing a Zelda clone, where you play Santa. Okay, and that's the general theme for most of these games. Like the brick handheld games, they're clones of pre-existing games. But look how much Toy Collector is struggling just to move in this game. Moving shouldn't be a clunky process in a game, it should be seamless and something you don't even think about. But even in a basic platform game, he's struggling with these controls just to jump. Another big gripe is none of these 220 games have instructions. I think Mr. Epic summed it up well in his review.
This device sucks, and the games are whack. Most games come with no directions and only have one level, despite saying level 1 at the beginning. False advertising. Not recommended.
Apparently the My Arcade was flimsily made too. Take what this Kindle customer said.
I bought this for my son as a gift, and he loved it until he dropped it once. After that, it didn't switch on. Absolute crap.
Mayank had similar faulty problems.
Games didn't play after a few hours of usage. I thought my kid was making it up. Then I saw the game running around in auto mode with no user input. I was shocked. Absolute piece of junk.
Ah, what a shame. I love a good retro gaming experience. It's a cheap disaster, but hey, there's plenty of much better retro handhelds out there already. And for a quick, mighty stupid choice, we have the Pop Station. When you can't afford a PlayStation Portable, the Pop Station will be there to disappoint. And I mean really disappoint. My consolation to anyone who bought this. How about City Fighter? It's like Street Fighter if it threw up everywhere. There was even portable knockoffs of these portable knockoffs, like the Pop Station 9999 in one brick game. Because I guess 999 brick games just wasn't enough. I was just like, please give me more quantity over quality. Clearly, I don't have enough brick games in my life. all on a record-breakingly minuscule screen. Look how much Wicked Gamer is having to zoom in just to play this garbage. According to the sources I could find, most of these pop stations were mass-produced in Shenzhen, China. But I just wanted to briefly mention this one because this is the only time I've seen 9,999 brick games in one. What is that, like the secret 10th level of Dante's Inferno? Play all 9,999 pop station games? My condolences if you were given or accidentally bought a pop station. I truly hope you quickly went on to own a real PSP. Our next failed choice is the Atari Lynx. I'm certainly not calling the Lynx stupid, because this console was amazing for 1989. Sadly though, it failed on the market and is another example of how the superior hardware rarely wins the console war. The Atari Lynx was giving us 16-bit graphics and a full-color screen with backlighting in 1989. I can't tell you, back in the day, how much of a pain in the rear zero backlighting was on my Game Boy.
The screen has no light, so if you try to play it in the dark, you'll see nothing.
To have a full-color backlit screen would have been amazing. But oh no, it didn't have Tetris or Mario, so green only for us. In fact, the Game Boy Color wasn't even released till 1998. And even then, the colors weren't as good as the Lynx. I'm sorry, I just spent so much of my childhood looking at badly lit, ugly shades of green. But we had handhelds like the Lynx and Game Gear under our noses the whole time. Some consider the Lynx the beginning of the Atari's downfall, but this handheld was actually started by the software developer Epix. They called it the Handy Game. I guess because it was handheld, and that's what they had. Epix mostly had the system all ready to go. Unfortunately, they were nearly bankrupt. So before they folded in 1989, they made a partnership with Atari. And thus the Atari Lynx was born, because I guess Atari has to name all their stuff after cats. Atari had what they thought would be a big hit, and I don't blame them for thinking that. Technology-wise, the Lynx was miles ahead of its time and would be for years to come. It even had advanced networking capabilities. In 1989, what the hell? It actually had higher capabilities than full TV consoles like the NES or the Sega Master System. On paper, it was awesome, but it lacked the wow factor for consumers, and I don't know about that games library. Plus, there were some big drawbacks to all this power. You see, this thing was big. But there was a crap load of technology in this thing, so I get it. It's 1989, we're lucky it wasn't the size of a house. This is what some reviewers said when they commented on the size.
We want a big handheld console that's comfortable to hold.
But they didn't appreciate how bulky it actually was. And yeah, for a handheld, it's not exactly going to fit in your pocket. Though it is arguable whether the original Game Boy did either. That thing was huge. Another common complaint was a terrible battery life. But given 6 AA batteries are running a 16-bit processor in 1989 with a full-color screen, it's not that surprising. But a 4-hour battery life for 6 AA batteries had to be pretty annoying. Sorry Mom, I have to go to the shops to buy 6 more AA batteries because I played my Lynx for a few hours. As a result, with these complaints, the Lynx didn't receive much third-party support. There were just no big companies producing games on the Lynx, so ultimately, sales are abysmal. With the Sega and Nintendo handheld systems raging across the market, when you could instead have Sega or Nintendo, Sonic or Mario on your system, the Lynx fell to the sidelines and faded into obscurity. Unfortunately, this also paved the way for the failure of the Atari Jaguar, and ultimately, the demise of the whole Atari franchise. Luckily, Bushnell got into Chuck E. Cheese and started that instead. But let's leave those stories to the many YouTube gaming channels out there. But how did the Lynx actually feel to play? Well, the video game critic gave an interesting perspective in his review.
The console is quite thick, and the directional pad and buttons feel tight. I felt fatigued during long gameplay. For its time, the graphics are decent, but sometimes a little chunky looking.
Well, frankly, I would have taken some chunky graphics over my Game Boy's 50 identical shades of green. Shame they never had many games beyond the Atari classics. The Lynx could have been really fun. And sadly, our next failed choice is the Sega Nomad. Back when we got this handheld in 1995, It was amazing because it was basically a handheld Genesis. But no, we had Tetris and Mario on the Game Boy, so till 1999, green only for us.
Honey, you really didn't like that green, did you?
No, I hated green, and it was just the technology was there all along and we never even knew. Well, I didn't. In fact, even in the 90s, the concept of the Switch was being played with, not by Nintendo, but by Sega.
Get out of town, really?
Yeah, in fact in 1995, Sega didn't just want a console you could play on the go, but a console you could connect to your television. So the Sega Nomad had an AV output so you could just hook it up to your TV, making it turn into a Genesis with the Nomad acting as the controller. In 1995, that's nearly 30 years ago. It's really a shame this concept was executed poorly, because this portable TV console was released 22 years before the Switch. On or off the TV, it played all the games a Genesis could. It was even portable with a Genesis controller, so it almost made the original Genesis feel redundant. But unfortunately, the Nomad was discontinued less than a year later. But why? Well, there are a few reasons. It didn't help that Sega had already disappointed consumers with the Sega 32X and the Sega CD, both failed add-ons to the Sega Genesis, and the Nomad only debuted in selected markets in North America. It also didn't get released much further than America, with very limited distribution in Asia. It's no wonder I don't remember this console in Australia. The marketing on this thing was terrible. So few people even knew the Nomad existed. I saw P. Strife discuss this issue on a gaming forum.
Nobody knew it existed, and even if you did, you'd be in shock about the associated expenses. It's no wonder it sold abysmally.
Yeah, the Nomad sold at $179 US each, so in 1995, this price was a bit steep. And even when Sega reduced the price to $100, the Nomad still didn't take off. Another common gripe of the Nomad was, of course, the battery life. This ahead of its time technology had to be powered somehow. The Nomad was commonly referred to as being a battery hog. Serious Bangs said as much on Reddit.
If I'm buying my kid a portable console, it's because I want something they can play on road trips. And I don't want to run a charging cable to the back of a cigarette lighter.
And that's perfectly fair. It does make me wonder though, what sort of gaming world will we have today if we've been playing our Switch-style Sega Nomads 22 years ago instead of the Game Boy? A world with less Pokemon and Mario, I suppose. More Sonic though, I'd be cool with that. And thanks for joining me in this journey through portable gaming devices. If you have any thoughts on these devices, if you have any experiences or memories with them, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, and whether I see you next time or not, I'll be back. Count on it. And it's now fair to say my new Patreon boss has put food on my table this month. Thank you. I know I prattle on about this a lot, but they really did save me. And an extra thanks to my bosses you see here, as well as a thanks to these bosses in my shoutout tier. Procrastinators, Matthew Forrest, John Bondi, Thomas Fernando, John Rogers, Angel Angeline, 3 Cat Day, Alex Inza, Seno Shrew, Shaw, Skizzo, The Furry of Fury, Cookie Monster, Amphibian Caden, Alec and Catherine Parkinson, Noel Schornhorst, Shockwave FPS Studios, Miss Arceus, Fluffpaws, Matthew Kirkland, The Goober, Killian N. Arthurjoint, Asher Gatchabasta, Jacob Snyder, Undead Sparrow, Joseph Bowers, Jenny Smith, Chris Mendez, Jordan McCann, Chris Schnoff, Joseph Bowers again, thank you very much. Ocean Survival, Chandler Amethyst, Alyssa Michelle, 2006 Honda Accord, nice car. I crashed a Honda Accord once when I was a parking shuffler. I lost my job that day. Pro voice actor One Dubs, Megan Bruns, Bubbles Dark, Pam DeBear, FCL, The Hug Wizard, Rayan Graves, Saturn Yoshi, yes is a $, and so is a Y, very clever. Eagle Talon 357, and William Johnson. Now, Nin and I absolutely love doing these comics, so we're doing some more of them. That Bigfoot badge is so mine. I guess it's funny because he's with Bigfoot?
Maybe. Even Bigfoot doesn't know. Look at his face.
Bigfoot, he's pretty confused too. Here you go. Happy birthday.
A giant picture of you?
It's gonna look so good on your wall.
No, it's not.
How is that even funny? It's terrible. You think we need more bubbles, Mr. Ducky? I would have to agree.
Pad, check it out. A bubble in a bubble. Try and beat that.
I don't even get that. Like, what, he's blowing more bubbles? Makes no sense.
Stupid.
It's really dumb.
It's silly.
My new coat is looking pretty sharp.
Hey, Pud. Wow, cool coat.
I'm not texting you back when you're standing right next to me. Oh, they had phones back then. My self-portrait inspired by the Cubist movement. What is with this guy and his obsession with paintings of himself? Whatever, Mom. My room isn't that dirty. Avalanche! I guess his room is dirty.